Nuclear energy. Many associate it with nuclear weapons or nuclear waste, but it is much more than that. Nuclear energy is a technology that has existed for over 60 years and millions of people have contributed to its creation. When nuclear power first arrived as a new source of commercial energy in the 1950s, it revolutionized how we generate electricity. It showed the world that you could generate huge amounts of electricity without the air pollution and carbon emissions that fossil fuel plants created. Nuclear power was greatly revolutionary to the energy industry and the world due to its high energy output with no pollution. And although many people reacted and still continue to react with fear and skepticism to it, nuclear power remains a necessary part of global energy production. This is revolutionizing power production, splitting the atom for the future of humanity. Nuclear fission was first discovered in 1938 by Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann. Their discovery was first used in the Manhattan Project, but then to build the world's first nuclear reactor in 1942 at the University of Chicago for experimentation. The same technology was later used to build the Hanford plutonium production reactors. Nuclear technology was quite new in the 1950s. At the time, the then President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, was heavily focused on keeping nuclear technologies peaceful and ending the nuclear arms race. Eisenhower said that if every country had access to nuclear material to develop nuclear energy, it could
rapidly be transformed into universal, efficient, and economic usage.
He then goes on to mention that fear of the atom is a problem that must be overcome. 3 years later, in 1956, the first commercial nuclear plant was built at Calder Hall in England. In these early stages of nuclear technology, the International Atomic Energy Agency was created as a branch of the United Nations, specifically for the purpose of preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Today, the International Atomic Energy Agency is necessary for reducing global tensions in reference to nuclear programs. A lot of the irrational public fear of nuclear energy is due to nuclear weapons and fictional interpretations of nuclear waste, such as in The Simpsons. In reality, nuclear energy is one of the safest forms of energy production. Donald Hertzmark was an international economics expert and a member of the International Energy Institute. He believes that with the global population constantly growing and the amount of fossil fuels constantly shrinking, the United States and the world will have no choice but to continue using nuclear power to remain economically stable. And on the topic of fossil fuels, millions of people die from coal mining, oil drilling, and fossil fuel burning every year. Coal power plants release sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, which causes acid rain that is harmful to human lungs, and contaminates soil and water, thus killing many trees and fish. However, 1 pound of nuclear fuel can produce as much energy as 15,500 pounds of coal. Some nuclear plants can power up to 500,000 homes or more. Nuclear energy could easily replace fossil fuels, and it would absolutely be for the betterment of humanity. The founder of the Electric Power Research Institute, Chauncey Starr, said that if you're a true environmentalist, you have to be a pro-nuclear enthusiast. Many experts will tell you that it's go nuclear or go home. The Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission oversees all United States nuclear reactors and enforces safety policies. The nuclear industry has a very high level of federal regulation, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will shut down any nuclear plants that it deems unsafe. The amount of oversights and mishaps in nuclear plants has been rapidly decreasing since the beginning of commercial nuclear power in the United States. The Nuclear Energy Institute, a pro-nuclear research organization, says that nuclear plants operate more safely, more efficiently, and more reliably from year to year. This is because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has rules and safety precautions that must be implemented in all U.S. nuclear plants. All nuclear plants must have highly trained personnel, frequent maintenance and rigorous testing, control rods to slow or stop the nuclear chain reaction, fast automatic emergency shutoffs, multiple emergency core cooling systems that will cool the reactor in an unlikely emergency, and an extremely durable concrete or steel containment structure at least 4 feet thick that blocks heat, pressure, and radiation from escaping the plant. Modern nuclear reactors and the people that operate them are definitely advanced enough to eliminate the possibility of more major nuclear accidents. Modern nuclear reactors are much safer than the ones from decades ago. They use computers, better materials, and passive safety systems that can cool the reactor even without human help. Nuclear plants are built with many layers of protection, not just one. If one system fails, then another one takes over, and then another. Today's designs make a disaster like Chernobyl impossible, and events like Fukushima much less likely. Their safety features don't require human action or power. The people who run reactors now are highly trained and follow strict rules, so the overall risk is extremely low. There has never been a death in the United States due to nuclear power. The reason for that is that safety takes a priority over everything. Many people fear nuclear waste, as if it is an imminent problem that could irradiate the world. But the fact of the matter is that over 60 years of all the nuclear waste ever produced in the US could fit on a single football field stacked just 10 meters high. There are actually two kinds of nuclear waste: high-level waste and low-level waste. High-level waste is radioactive waste from used nuclear fuel directly from a nuclear reactor. Since 1987, the United States has been planning to build a permanent repository disposal site under Yucca Mountain, Nevada, where it could be stored safely for up to 10,000 years or longer. The idea of storing the United States high-level waste stockpile in Yucca Mountain is supported by organizations such as the Nuclear Energy Institute, American Physical Society, International Atomic Energy Agency, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Research Council. And then there is low-level waste, which comes in the form of things used to clean nuclear reactors. It is safe enough to be packaged in leak-proof containers and stored in underground trenches. Waste disposal facilities have not yet caused problems with public health, and are becoming increasingly safer with newer technology. A facility in Barnwell County, South Carolina, was actually quite liked among the people of the county. It provided jobs and tax relief, and no ill effects came from living near the facility. The county government was even receiving $2.5 million each year for keeping the facility open. And as you can probably guess, it is highly illegal to dump nuclear waste into lakes. As a matter of fact, the lakes where the water used in nuclear power plants comes from are just as, if not more safe than most lakes due to the non-polluting nature of nuclear energy and the monitoring from environmental protection services. For example, Harris Lake, which supplies cool water to Harris Nuclear Power Plant in North Carolina, has healthy aquatic life and is often used for fishing, boating, and aquatic skiing. Not to mention swimming, of course. The lake also supplies water for drinking and irrigation. Scientists are also constantly trying to find new ways to safely store nuclear waste, such as at the Hanford Nuclear Facility. The Hanford Nuclear Facility is not a nuclear plant. It was first used during World War II to produce plutonium for the Manhattan Project, and continued production up until the end of the Cold War. Washington State and the U.S. Department of Energy have been working on transforming hazardous radioactive waste into glass at the Hanford site for over 25 years. The process finally officially began recently in October 2025. This is working toward the ultimate goal of cleaning up the Hanford site in order to contribute to public health and safety, and this form of nuclear waste cleanup is the first of its kind, as it is very unique and complex. These actions are required. One, because there are over 150 storage tanks filled with nuclear waste at the facility, which could flow into the ground and eventually into the Columbia River. But also, two, because if this process could be streamlined, it could be used on more nuclear waste produced all throughout the world and make progress towards fixing the nuclear waste problem. Not to mention that the Hanford facility also employs about 12,000 people, and more facilities like this could create more jobs in the United States and the world. Historically, France has gotten its energy from fossil fuels, but the oil crisis in 1973 forced France to find a new energy source. By then, nuclear reactors were already being used across the world, and France had already done research into nuclear engineering during World War II. So, France decided to go nuclear, and since then, France has leaned heavily into its reliance on nuclear energy. France has the highest dependency on nuclear power in the world. France runs 58 nuclear reactors, which makes the country the world's second largest producer of nuclear power behind the United States. Due to its reliance on non-fossil fuel sources of energy, France has a much lower carbon footprint than most other European countries. France is the sixth lowest producer of greenhouse gases in Europe, as only 11% of its energy comes from fossil fuels, compared to 46% for Germany and 79% for Poland. Moreover, most fossil fuels in Europe come from Russia, which has put sanctions on the rest of Europe, damaging their energy industries. However, France gets almost all of its uranium from some of the largest uranium mining industries in the world, including Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Namibia, which are all neutral countries mostly unaffected by war. Even if one of these countries was unable to continue supplying France, France could simply import more from the others. However, France's production of energy has been at an all-time low in the past 30 years, and France has had to begin importing external energy. This is due to water shortages, due to droughts, the 2020 COVID pandemic preventing maintenance workers from being consistently available, and sanctions from Russia during the Russia-Ukraine war. These are all unfortunate products of bad luck. But despite all this, 80% of the French public support nuclear power. The new president of France, Emmanuel Macron, is pro-nuclear and has been public about his ambitions to build smaller nuclear plants and reactors because their construction is faster, easier, and less likely to delay, and you can build them almost anywhere. Overall, France is a great example of what happens when you ditch fossil fuels and go full nuclear. However, all of this talk of safety is not to mention nuclear accidents, such as the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. The 3 Mile Island accident was the first and only major nuclear accident in the United States that occurred in 1979 due to faulty equipment and poor communication. During the accident, radiation was released into the city of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Surprisingly, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Health, Education and Welfare, Department of Energy, and the state of Pennsylvania all concluded that nobody within 50 miles of 3 Mile Island was harmed or showed any resulting negative health effects in the following 12 years after the accident. This is likely because the amount of radiation produced by nuclear plants is minuscule compared to the amount we humans experience from electronic devices and cosmic background radiation. However, the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident did result in the creation of the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, which is another layer of inspection and maintenance on all U.S. nuclear plants, and the National Academy of Nuclear Training, which creates disaster simulations to test future plant operators and operations. The overall cleanup of 3 Mile Island was about $1 billion, but the amount that we learned from it and the amount of improvements to public safety that have been made makes 3 Mile Island a net positive and a necessary loss, especially since no nuclear accident of the same magnitude has occurred in the United States since the accident 47 years ago. Many of the skills we learned from the 3 Mile Island accident include how to treat radioactive water, how to inspect and clean damaged reactor cores, how to safely ship high-level waste, and how to use robots to clean high-level waste for safety. However, many people also mention the Fukushima nuclear accident, in which everybody who lived close to the plant was evacuated hundreds of miles away. Many of these residents say that even if the exclusion zone were to be reopened, some towns in the area were becoming storage spaces for radioactive soil. Many of the workers are now unemployed and are no longer receiving compensation from the company that runs the plant, TEPCO, or the Japanese government. Many in Japan at the time felt afraid, as they thought that nuclear power was 100% safe. But many towns in the area are now an abandoned and irradiated wasteland. Now, many in Japan are completely against the use of nuclear power. Many people also point to the Chernobyl nuclear disaster that may have caused tens of thousands of cases of cancer, and nearly 10 million people may have been exposed to radiation. Over 700,000 people may have died of cancer due to the radioactivity, even with Soviet efforts to evacuate over 300,000 people out of the exclusion zone. European countries and many other countries stopped the trade of livestock and produce from Eastern Europe, which, when added on top of the billions the Soviet government spent trying to clean up the disaster, greatly harmed the Soviet economy, which was already very unstable. The Chernobyl disaster was one of the many major contributors to the decline and eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union 5 years later. Total economic damage and healthcare costs for radiation exposure potentially exceeds $700 billion. All of this is undeniably very bad, but the things that caused these accidents have mostly been fixed, and we are always working towards improving things. I would not be surprised if Fukushima was the last major nuclear accident in human history. When the Pilgrim nuclear power plant in Plymouth, Massachusetts was being decommissioned in February of 2024, the company in charge, Holtec, did not want to pay the transport costs to send the waste from the plant to disposal facilities, so they began evaporating the radioactive waste directly into the atmosphere, which all experts involved, including Holtec themselves, admitted was a major environmental and public health concern, as the waste contains chemicals known to cause many types of cancer, as well as leukemia. Despite these concerns, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is allowing Holtec to continue. As Holtec releases these wastes into the atmosphere, it may irradiate the air in nearby aquifers, affecting sea life and contaminating water. Some experts believe that this form of radioactive waste disposal is just as unsafe as dumping the waste directly into the water. Philip Landegren, a professor at Boston College, believes that any level of radiation exposure carries the risk of disease, especially for infants and adolescents. This is all evidence that companies such as Holtec will sometimes keep unsafe nuclear plants running for monetary gain. As of today, nuclear power produces 15% of the world's power. It revolutionized how we generate electricity, as it could produce massive amounts of energy without any greenhouse gas emissions. I firmly believe that the introduction of nuclear power to the global energy production scene was greatly revolutionary to the world. Although there has been much pushback from people since the 1960s, there is simply too much to be gained from the use of nuclear power to give up on it now, especially as we are so close to fixing the nuclear waste problems. I hope that after all the facts have been presented, you too will agree that nuclear power was and will continue to be revolutionary.